faithfully delivering value and interpreting great books from around the world. Hello, this is Sally Book Talk. Today, I'll interpret this book called A General History of France. The author is the vice president of the Chinese Society for French History Research and a professor at Zhejiang University's Department of History. Liu Yumin. France, officially the French Republic, has an area of over 670,000 square kilometers, slightly smaller than China's Qinghai province. To the south, it borders Spain and faces the Mediterranean Sea. To the east, it borders Italy, Switzerland, Germany, and Belgium in sequence. To the north, it faces the English Channel overlooking the UK across the sea. To the west, it faces the vast Atlantic Ocean, maintaining close ties with the American continent. France's territory is predominantly plains, accounting for over two-thirds of the total area. The Loire Valley and the Paris Basin are both vast plains with pleasant climates. Superior geographical conditions allowed France to be developed into settlements very early by humans. Around 7,000 years ago, the ancestors living here had already mastered various skills, like cultivating wheat, raising livestock, firing pottery, and making bows and arrows. Around 600 BC, the Celts, originating from the Danube River basin, began expanding everywhere. Because they had iron smelting technology and could forge sharp iron swords, the indigenous people couldn't resist. Soon, Celtic tribes spread throughout Western Europe. Today's France was naturally included. Coincidentally, during the same period, ancient Greece also experienced a colonial surge and established a colony in Marseille, southern France. So, the Celts' actions were observed by the Greeks. They pronounced Celts as Gauls, and from then on, those Celts living in Western Europe were called Gauls. Later, the French traced their history back to the Gaul period, claiming to be descendants of the Gauls. The Gauls indeed had a profound influence on France. France's earliest cities were established by the Gauls, such as Paris, Amiens, and Nantes, which were originally names of Gaulish tribes. After this, the Gauls became the main population of France. It can be said that modern French people have Gallic blood flowing in their veins. Many French people have a Gaul complex. The French football team uses the Gallic rooster as its symbol. So, how did the Gaul of that time become French Gauls? And how did it become the French nation? The book, A General History of France, that I'll discuss next, outlines the unique development of France and the French nation in a concise and clear language. My narration is divided into 8 parts, presented in 2 episodes. The first episode focuses on ancient France, emphasizing the Roman conquest and Romanization, France's path to unification, the establishment and peak of absolute monarchy, and the rise of the Enlightenment. The second episode focuses on modern France, covering the outbreak and conclusion of the French Revolution, political turmoil, the 2 world wars periods, and post-war recovery and development. All right, let's begin with the first part, the Roman conquest and Romanization. As mentioned earlier, armed with iron weapons, the Gauls dominated Western Europe. They didn't halt their expansion. Instead, they crossed the Alps into the Italian peninsula, clashing with the emerging Roman Republic. Initially, the Gauls had the upper hand. In 386 BC, they even captured Rome. But ultimately, the Romans prevailed. After centuries of warfare, Rome emerged victorious and established the province of Gaul. How did the Romans manage to turn the tables? The reason lies in how the Gauls fought. Fierce but fragmented. They were divided into hundreds of tribes governing independently, even attacking each other. The Gauls also lacked mature administrative institutions. Their governance was primitive. They could achieve temporary victories but couldn't sustain rule. A reversal was inevitable. And in 1970 BC, the Romans counterattacked, gradually reclaiming territories south of the Alps and establishing Gallia Cisalpina province. In 58 BC, Julius Caesar, one of Rome's greatest generals, became governor of Gallia Cisalpina. Immediately upon taking office, he planned to cross the Alps and completely conquer Gaul. Caesar fought for 8 full years. In his commentaries on the Gallic War, he claimed Roman legions defeated 4 million Gauls and captured over 800 towns. Caesar's claims might be exaggerated, but the war's brutality was undeniable. Undoubtedly, Caesar incorporated the newly conquered territories into Gaul province, encompassing most of Western Europe. However, before he could govern, he was assassinated. The task of developing Gaul fell to Caesar's adopted son, Octavian, founder of the Roman Empire. In 27 BC, the Roman Senate granted Octavian the title Augustus. Augustus means sacred great ruler, marking the end of the Roman Republic and birth of the Roman Empire. After coming to power, Augustus divided provinces into two types: senatorial provinces, governed by consuls appointed by the Senate, and imperial provinces ruled directly by Augustus. Gaul province was split into four, with three becoming imperial provinces covering modern Western, Central France, and Switzerland. Part of the administrative center was set in Lyon, a city in southeastern France today. Thus, Gaul entered the period of Romanization, which left two legacies for Gaul. The first legacy is urban civilization. The Gauls also built some cities, like Paris and Nantes, but they were crude, barely better than villages. The Romans were different. They possessed a developed urban civilization. Rome was large-scale, densely populated, and meticulously planned. Using this as a template, the Romans built a series of cities in Gaul. Take Lyon as an example. Its city center featured a spacious rectangular square, surrounded by public buildings like government offices, temples, arenas, and public baths. Shops, workshops, and residences were distributed around the periphery of these public buildings. All these structures were connected by straight, wide streets. From an aerial view, you'd see Lyon as a well-planned, clean, and orderly city. Driven by the Romans, urban civilization flourished and spread throughout Gaul. By the 2nd century AD, Gaul had 1,200 cities, with large ones housing tens of thousands of residents, and medium to small cities, typically 4,000 to 5,000. Order was maintained and trade thrived. Today, a significant portion of French cities, like Lyon, Paris, and Bordeaux, have layouts fundamentally established during the Roman conquest. The second legacy left by the Romans is the Latin language. Given the difficulty of the conquest, Augustus believed that only through cultural assimilation of the Gauls would Roman rule become truly stable, so he vigorously promoted Latin. Augustus decreed that Latin was the official language of Gaul. Any official documents or commercial contracts had to be written in Latin to have legal effect. Coincidentally, the Gauls had no writing system of their own, which facilitated the spread of Latin. After a long evolution, by the Middle Ages, Latin evolved into Romance languages, gradually developing into modern French. Thus, the language habits of the conquered were completely changed. It must be said that Roman governance was highly successful. Under the protection of the Roman Empire, Gaul enjoyed over 200 years of peaceful development, known as the Pax Romana. However, the good days were bound to end. From the mid-3rd century, Gaul plunged into a crisis and chaos lasting over 300 years, due to two reasons: the decline of the Roman Empire and barbarian invasions. And first, let's discuss the decline of the Roman Empire. After the reigns of famous emperors like Augustus, Trajan, and Hadrian, the Roman Empire began to decline. Economic recession and frequent coups occurred, with multiple factions fighting for power. And the central government was busy with infighting, weakening control over the regions. This gave opportunities to local power brokers. In 258 AD, the commander of the Gaul garrison, Postumus, broke away from Rome and declared himself emperor, establishing the Gallic Empire. This so-called empire lasted only over 10 years. Postumus was mediocre in ability and couldn't resolve the internal conflicts in Gaul. He himself was killed in a soldier mutiny. After that, the Gallic Empire declined rapidly. Yet, even facing such an opponent, Rome couldn't handle it. In the end, the Gallic emperor couldn't hold on any longer and voluntarily submitted, bringing it back under Roman control. But Rome's authority in Gaul was gone forever. Now, the second cause of Gaul's 300-year crisis barbarian invasions. In the 3rd century, Germanic tribes from the east migrated westward, putting immense pressure on the Roman Empire, um, historically known as the barbarian invasions. Gaul, with its numerous cities and prosperous economy, naturally made the Germans envious, and they raided almost every year. To organize defenses, in 293 AD, Roman Emperor Diocletian divided the empire into 2 parts, the Western Roman Empire and the Eastern Roman Empire. Gaul belonged to the Western Roman Empire, and the situation improved slightly thereafter, but Germanic invasions continued for 100 years. The Western Roman Empire couldn't hold out any longer. Gaul, repeatedly plundered, was devastated, with beggars everywhere. According to statistics, during the barbarian invasions, Gaul's population plummeted by 1/3, and in some areas over half died unnaturally. In 476 AD, the last emperor of the Western Roman Empire was deposed by the Germans, marking the fall of the Western Roman Empire. This marked the complete end of the Romanization period. My narration will now move to the second part, the path to unification. Around the fall of the Western Roman Empire, Gaul was divided among various barbarian tribes. In 3848, one branch of the Germans, the Visigoths, established the Visigothic kingdom in southwestern Gaul, with its capital at Toulouse. Not long after, the Burgundians, originating from Scandinavia, moved south and built the Kingdom of Burgundy in southeastern Gaul, with its capital at Lyon. In 481, another Germanic branch, the Franks, occupied northeastern Gaul and established the Frankish kingdom. This Frankish kingdom gradually expanded outward, reaching its peak under Charlemagne. Charlemagne ascended to the throne in 768 AD. He reigned for 46 years, vigorously expanding the territory. At its peak, the Frankish territory encompassed all of modern-day France, Switzerland, Austria, Belgium, and the Netherlands, plus parts of Germany, Italy, Spain, and regions of Eastern Europe. What's more, because Charlemagne had helped the Pope, as a reward, Pope Leo III crowned him emperor on Christmas Day in the year 800. Thus, Charlemagne was elevated from king to emperor, and the Frankish kingdom transformed into the Frankish Empire. This was the first empire to almost unify all of Europe after the collapse of the Western Roman Empire. But even a great ruler like Charlemagne was bound by tradition. What tradition? Well, according to Frankish custom, after the king's death, the realm would be divided equally among his sons. Sure enough, in 1814 AD, Charlemagne died. The territory was divided among his heirs, and the nation plunged into civil strife. In 843 AD, the Frankish Empire was officially split into 3 parts: the West Frankish Kingdom, the Middle Frankish Kingdom, and the East Frankish Kingdom. This West Frankish Kingdom covered the basic territory of modern France, so now I'll focus on its history. After gaining independence, the West Frankish Kingdom had unstable politics and frequent changes of kingship, until in 987 AD, when Frankish nobles elected Hugh Capet as king and renamed the kingdom France. Oh, kingdom.
Why was it called France?
It's a geographical term. Between the Seine River in northern France and the Loire River in the center lies a valley region, including cities like Paris and Orléans, which was called France, meaning land of the Franks. Hugh Capet was originally the Duke of France, so when he became king, the kingdom was named the Kingdom of France. From then on, France became the official name of the country, and Paris became its capital. When Capet took the throne, the situation wasn't optimistic. He was called the King of France, but the area he controlled was only Paris and its surroundings, less than 1/10 of the territory. The rest was ruled by various dukes and counts. These feudal nobles nominally obeyed the French king, but actually did as they pleased in their domains. So initially, the French king had limited power. He couldn't even collect taxes. In the most desperate times, the mighty King of France even resorted to robbing passing merchants to solve financial difficulties. However, Capet implemented a major reform, abolishing the tradition of dividing the realm among sons, and instead passing the throne to one son. This ensured the integrity and continuity of royal succession. It also provided the necessary environment for strengthening royal power. As expected, subsequent French kings after Capet, free from territorial divisions among brothers, could concentrate national power against feudal nobles. They destroyed many nobles' castles and forced them to submit. Awfully, after centuries of warfare, the substantive unification of France was about to be achieved. But then a roadblock emerged. How could it be England? This requires starting from the beginning. In northern France, there was the Duchy of Normandy. In 1066, William, Duke of Normandy, crossed the English Channel, conquered England, and declared himself king. From then on, William and his successors held dual identities as King of England and vassal Duke of Normandy to the King of France. If the French king only maintained nominal rule, both sides could coexist peacefully. Once the former sought unification, it was bound to provoke resistance because the English king didn't want to lose control over Normandy. During the unification of France, English territories in France were gradually seized. Even Normandy was lost, leaving only a small fief in eastern France. In May 1337, King Philip VI of France ordered the confiscation of this last fief. King Edward III of England countered by declaring war on France. A prolonged war lasting 116 years erupted, historically known as the Hundred Years' War. In the first half, the English army crushed the French forces, even capturing the French king and many nobles. The Dauphin Charles retreated to southern France. With France on the brink of being annexed by England and near collapse, French national consciousness was instead awakened. The representative figure was a 19-year-old girl, Joan of Arc, born in eastern France. From a young age, she witnessed English soldiers looting and killing, which filled her with hatred. And that made a small friend. At the age of 13, she claimed to hear God's call to save her homeland. In 1428, the English army besieged the strategic town of Orléans. If it fell, southern France would be exposed and resistance would be futile. Upon hearing this, Joan went to the Dauphin Charles, saying she was sent by God to lift the siege. Charles, desperate for help, reluctantly gave her an army to try. Seeing even a young girl so patriotic, the French soldiers were inspired, and they repelled the English army. Subsequently, the French army pursued the victory, reclaiming vast territories, including key strongholds in the northeast. Reims. In July 1429, the Dauphin Charles was crowned at Reims Cathedral as Charles VII. During the coronation, Joan of Arc stood beside him holding a banner. Unfortunately, a year later, Joan was captured. The British organized a religious court, accusing her of witchcraft, and burned her at the stake. They intended to intimidate the French, but instead, it united them in common hatred and ignited a strong sense of French national identity. Under the battle cry of avenging Joan of Arc, the French fought with increasing courage, completely reversing the war's course. In July 1453, the French army annihilated the main English forces. On October 19th, the two nations signed a treaty ending the Hundred Years' War. With this obstacle removed, the French king quickly subdued remaining separatist forces like Burgundy and Provence, marking France's complete unification and the formal formation of the French nation. Thus, my narration moves to the third part, the establishment and peak of absolute monarchy. After France's unification, central power greatly strengthened, while feudal nobles were severely weakened and reduced to the king's servants, all due to expanding royal authority. This was mainly manifested in two aspects. First, the strengthening of the French king's military power. Before the Hundred Years' War, the French army relied on noble conscription, making it difficult for the king to control warfare. And later, Charles VII established a standing army and commanded it personally. From then on, the French king possessed military power superior to that of the feudal nobles. The second aspect, the French king allied with the bourgeoisie to suppress the nobles. During unification, self-sufficient feudal forces were broken, allowing a national market to form, which boosted commerce and industry, leading to the bourgeoisie's rise. These people were immensely wealthy and lavish spenders, making the nobles seem shabby in comparison. Because nobles lived off rents paid by peasants, and these rents remained unchanged for long periods, noble incomes stagnated, unable to keep pace with the bourgeoisie's wealth accumulation. Although the bourgeoisie was wealthy, their social status was inferior to nobles, and they had no right to participate in political affairs. Ow, ow. They longed to change this situation, and the French king saw an opportunity. Originally, the king appointed nobles as ministers. Now, he retained their titles and status but stripped their real power, replacing them with townspeople and merchants, officials from the bourgeoisie, and even allowed them to buy noble titles with money. These new nobles, promoted by the French king, were naturally loyal, allowing the king to firmly grasp governmental power. The nobles' incomes couldn't rise while their power was stripped away. Wow. If feudal nobles wanted to maintain luxurious lifestyles, they could only rely on the king's salaries and rewards. Thus, they could only serve as the king's subjects, establishing absolute monarchy. In 1589, a member of the Bourbon family inherited the French throne, historically known as the Bourbon dynasty, which produced two important figures. They further strengthened absolute monarchy and upgraded it to absolute monarchy. These two were Cardinal Richelieu and the Sun King Louis XIV. First, let's discuss Richelieu. Richelieu was a clergyman who became cardinal in 1622. This cardinal was extraordinary. He was promoted by Louis XIII. He served as prime minister for 18 years, until his death. Richelieu devoted himself to consolidating absolute monarchy, ruthlessly suppressing anyone challenging royal authority, most notably exiling Queen Mother Marie. Louis XI ascended the throne as a child, with state affairs long controlled by Queen Mother Marie. After becoming prime minister, Richelieu relentlessly reduced the Queen Mother's power, provoking her intense resentment. In November 1630, Queen Mother Marie brought the king's brother Gaston to Louis XIII, tearfully complaining. But Louis XIII knew he couldn't dismiss Richelieu, or he'd be next to lose power. On 5 US 7, Louis XIII, he summoned Richelieu, declaring, "I must answer to the nation, not my mother." Richelieu immediately exiled Queen Mother Marie with lightning speed. Ultimately, the Queen Mother died impoverished and ill. The king's brother Gaston fled to provinces to incite rebellion, which was suppressed. He was stripped of titles, while rebellious dukes and counts were executed. Through this, Richelieu realized court control over provinces was weak, so he dispatched governors to each region. These governors, directly appointed by the king, held provincial judicial, administrative, and financial power, greatly strengthening central control. This marked French absolute monarchy's shift to absolutism, royal authority tolerating zero challenge. Not even the king's closest kin! In 1642, Richelieu died of illness. Half a year later, Louis XIII passed away. His 5-year-old son, Louis XIV, inherited the throne, the zenith of absolute monarchy. The era of Louis XIV began. Louis XIV took personal control at 23, ruling 54 years without appointing a single prime minister, completely monopolizing power. In consolidating and strengthening absolute monarchy, he mainly accomplished two things. First, completely dismantling the nobility's will to resist. Traditionally, royal decrees required registration by the Paris Parliament to take effect. Since judges were mostly nobles, this preserved their ability to oppose royal authority. Louis XIV naturally wouldn't tolerate this. Once, he stormed into the Paris Parliament wielding a whip, demanding unconditional registration of his decrees. Those who disobeyed were summarily dismissed or exiled. This was the stick. Then came the carrot. Previous French kings resided in the Louvre, but Louis XIV wasn't satisfied. He ordered construction of the Palace of Versailles in Paris's southwestern suburbs and relocated the royal court there. He then summoned numerous nobles to serve as courtiers. Those who performed well received lavish rewards. Thus they competed to please Louis XIV, completely losing both the will and ability to oppose royal power. The second thing Louis XIV did was actively expand abroad, making France a top European power. Soon, he waged war against Spain, successfully capturing 12 fortresses. He then turned to wealthy Holland. Overwhelmed, Holland sought help everywhere. Spain, Denmark, Sweden, and German princes all offered support, creating a situation where France single-handedly confronted European powers.
Yet the outcome, France still won in 1679.
France signed the Treaty of Nijmegen with Holland, Spain, and others. This treaty not only granted France vast, fertile lands, but was also written in French. Afterwards, French replaced Latin as the primary diplomatic language. Simultaneously, Louis XIV aggressively pursued overseas colonization, with France expanding into vast territories in America and Africa. Colonies even reached Asia, seizing territories in India and Southeast Asia, rivaling British colonists. Louis XIV also passionately sponsored culture and arts, leading to a French cultural renaissance, especially in theater, with three masters, Corneille, Molière, and Racine. Molière's Tartuffe became an instant European sensation and remains timeless.
Molière also established fundamental norms for classical theater.
The three unities: one play must have a single theme unfolding in one setting within one day. This principle dominated theater for over 2 centuries until modern times. With cultural flourishing, French was considered a noble and elegant language, widely embraced. Nobles in Germany, Poland, Russia, and even France's arch-rivals,
The British and Spanish took pride in speaking fluent French. Mastering French became essential for entering high society.
Thus, France became not only a top European power, but also a cultural giant. Louis XIV earned the Sun King title, with nationwide praise. However, behind this triumphant era lurked a massive crisis. Victory clouded Louis XIV's judgment, making him increasingly grandiose, alarming other nations. Especially after the Hundred Years' War, Britain's strategy was preventing continental superpowers to avoid cross-channel invasions. We know that
Louis XIV's endless expansion deeply worried the British.
They united European forces against France, climaxing in the War of the Spanish Succession. In late 1700, King Charles II of Spain fell gravely ill. With no heir, Charles II had to choose a successor from collateral relatives. He selected his grandnephew, grandson of his sister Maria Theresa and Louis XIV, Philip V of France. Incidentally, European royal families long intermarried, creating complex blood ties, like Teresa and Louis XIV being cousins. Now, Charles II passing the Spanish throne to their grandson intensified these bonds, right? This created a problem. If Louis XIV passed the French throne to Philip V, Spain would be annexed by France. To prevent this, Charles II stipulated no Franco-Spanish union, hoping to crush Louis XIV's ambitions.
Louis IV initially agreed, but immediately issued upon Charles II's death
A special decree declaring Philip V's right to the French throne, meaning Franco-Spanish merger after the Sun King's death, unacceptable to Britain.
Britain allied with Holland and Austria against France. Later, Portugal, Sardinia, and German princes joined, fighting for 15 years. This time, Louis XIV's prowess vanished. He was forced to renounce Franco-Spanish union and cede territories to Holland and Austria. The War of Spanish Succession marked the decline of French absolute monarchy from its peak. Louis XIV died shortly after the war, yet his successor Louis XV remained immersed in the illusion of France's supremacy. This ruler dragged France into multiple wars during his nearly 60-year reign. He clashed fiercely with Britain in America and India, suffering consecutive defeats that cost most colonies and pushed finances toward bankruptcy. France descended from first-rate power to second-rate nation, while Louis XV indulged in sensual pleasures. His affairs with Madame de Pompadour and Madame du Barry became scandalous public knowledge. To amuse his lovers, he emptied the national treasury without hesitation.
When ministers advised fiscal restraint, he'd turn away to joke with favorites, exposing absolute monarchy's flaws through this buffoonish king.
Intellectuals engaged in serious reflection and fierce criticism, leading to our fourth section, the rise of the Enlightenment. This movement had 2 phases. Early, early 18th century to mid-century and late 1750s to 1789 French Revolution. Ideas grew increasingly radical. Intellectuals shifted from enlightened absolutism to popular sovereignty. This trend is evident in Enlightenment thinkers' evolving views. Early Enlightenment figures like Montesquieu and Voltaire flourished during Louis V's mid-reign. Montesquieu, born noble, served as Bordeaux High Court president, traveled Europe, and admired Britain's constitutional monarchy. He deeply criticized French absolute monarchy's flaws.
He argued monarchs with absolute power couldn't remain wise and virtuous. Only separation of powers could restrain abuses.
In works like Persian Letters and The Spirit of Laws, Montesquieu systematically presented these ideas.
Both books were covered on Sally Book Talk. Interested listeners can explore them.
Voltaire, slightly younger than Montesquieu, was twice imprisoned in the Bastille for satirizing elites in poetry.
Politically, Voltaire advocated enlightened absolutism. In the age of Louis XIV, he glorified the monarch as an enlightened ruler.
By the 1750s, as Louis XV's rule decayed amid political corruption and national decline, criticism intensified, led by the encyclopedist. The encyclopedists got their name from compiling and publishing the encyclopedia with core figures including Diderot, D'Alembert, Rousseau, and others. Compared to their predecessors, these young thinkers held more radical views. For instance, while Montesquieu and Voltaire fiercely criticized the Church, they remained devout Christians themselves. Yet Diderot, the encyclopedist leader, openly declared himself an atheist, dealing a devastating blow to the monarchy's legitimacy. Why? Because French kings historically claimed divine right, that royal authority came from God, the theoretical basis for ruling people, even despotically. But atheists don't acknowledge God, let alone respect royal authority.
While divine right theory was shaken, the fatal blow came from Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the most radical encyclopedist. Unlike other 18th century thinkers, nobles, or wealthy elites, Rousseau came from poverty. His struggles showed him human inequality wasn't natural, but created by despotic rule.
Countering divine right, Rousseau proposed popular sovereignty.
Rulers' power comes not from God, but from people transferring and consenting to it to protect their rights. A contract between ruler and ruled. If rulers become tyrannical, they break this contract, and people have the right to overthrow them.
Through works like The Social Contract, Rousseau's ideas spread widely. Popular sovereignty gradually gained acceptance among intellectuals, laying the ideological groundwork for the French Revolution. And the revolutionary theory was now in place. When would revolutionary action emerge? In the next episode, I'll detail that revolutionary action which profoundly transformed human history. All right, that concludes the first part of A General History of France. Study notes are below the audio. See you next time.